Welcome back to A Celtic State of Mind. I'm Paul John Dykes, and tonight I'm delighted to be joined by Tommy Sheridan, where we'll be talking to MICK LYNCH. MICK LYNCH, welcome to Glasgow. You're here for a very special lecture this evening. Could you tell us a wee bit about Jimmy Reid?
Well, what I know about Jimmy Reid, it starts with the UCS, the Upper Clyde Shipyards activity, and I followed that as a boy. I'll be saying this tonight, I won't give my speech away, but the impressions I had of trade unionists, which were remarkable at the time, those was like me and Tommy were anoraks, I suppose, for the trade union and labour movement. These massive figures, Jimmy Early as well, and I think Sammy Barr, was it?
That's
I think,
right,
the activist.
Yep.
So that made a real impression on me. There was a famous speech that he made about the occupation and the working and the discipline and the tone and the presence that he had as a leader. And then I remember the Parkinson interviews. He had a famous Parkinson debate with Kenneth Williams.
That's right, remember him?
It was really exciting as a young lad. So I spent my youth. So it's that, and he was a great figure, and then went on to do other stuff, post-industrial stuff as a commentator and as a bit of a philosopher. And Scottish nationalism and all that stuff. I won't be touching on all that as a Londoner. It's dangerous territory for me. But it's interesting that they've invited me, so I'm very delighted. And I hope I can live up to it. Apparently it's sold out, so we'll see how we get on.
Brilliant. Welcome to Glasgow. It's a real pleasure to have you here. I know Tommy will be excited as well. But on the theme of Jimmy Reid, I was just saying before, Tommy, there's always a Celtic link when it comes to it, right?
Yeah.
And he presented George Connolly with the Scotland Player of the Year trophy, which brought to mind that famous speech where he was talking about the world is watching. There will be no hooliganism.
Yeah.
There will be no drinking.
No bevying.
No bevying. That's a good...
And who did he support, Jimmy Reid?
Oh, I think Jimmy always told me he was a thistle man.
That's what...
He was very, very...
And that's what a lot of leading trade unions say.
That's what they all said.
Or I like cycling.
Jimmy always...
You've got to be careful, Tommy, because you could alienate a huge part of the city, couldn't you?
Listen, we're at Celtic State of Mind. I have to say, Mick, in terms of guests on the show, we've had some fantastic guests, but in terms of Paul, John and I don't want to blow smoke up your arse or anything, but, you know, you're a hero of us, because during the last couple of years, mate, things have been absolutely dire politically. 2020, 2021, 22, Tories getting back and fucking re-elected. And then all of a sudden you come onto the scene, mate, and you actually talk sense.
That's the remarkable thing. I think what the Tories thought in 21 when COVID finished, that the working class had been destroyed, that there'd been no fight back. And they picked on our union and our industry. And fortunately, we were match fit. We always had been under our predecessors, going back to Jimmy Knapp, Bob Crow, Mick Cash. We always fought back, always knew how to ballot, even under these laws that we've got in this country. So they picked on the wrong people, really. And remember that fella Grant Shapps? Everybody's favourite Tory. He thought he was going to finish us off in 2 weeks. He was going to get thousands of agency labour to do our work. And we've seen them off, and I'm delighted we've seen them off. We've all got reservations about Starmer. I'm sure you've got a few. But equally, when your big opponent loses, that's what you want to see. Doesn't matter who the opposition is that beating them. And I'm glad Labour beat the Tories. That's in a class analysis, it's better that Labour won than the Tories won. It's very simple for me. It's binary. There's other problems about that, which we'll go into over the next few years. But I'm delighted they're gone, because I think they were dragging the country into the mire, and it's an important point. So we'll maybe talk about a bit of that tonight and how we bounce back. But we'll talk about some other stuff as well.
You mentioned Grant Shapps. I mean, you knitted him a new arsehole. That's the truth of the matter, and that's what made people feel strong again, Mick. You were articulating what we all felt, but nobody else was. I mean, let's face it, for the last decade or so, unless the wee bit comes up at the bottom to tell you what party they're in, you wouldn't know what the politicians are, because they're not saying the same thing.
It's making the differentiation between, for working people, they will know what side are you on. If you're a trade unionist, you're on our side. And people talk about class analysis and they talk about very clever politics. If they're trying to rip us off at work, that's what you've got to say. They're trying to do us in. And for the railway workers, we're one of the last bastions that has got agreements. It's got holiday pay, sick pay. We've got the right to negotiate on our working time, which for transport workers is really important. They wanted to rob us all of that, take away pay negotiations and put us into these pay review boards, and our members understood it. And being with your members is absolutely where you need to be. You can't be a million miles ahead, dragging them out on strike,
Absolutely.
and you can't be a million miles behind them trying to stop them going on strike. And we're all railway workers and transport workers. We don't come from the outside. We're elected from the tools, and I think that's really important in our union. Not just for me, but all the officers. Some of the ones you know up here in Glasgow and Edinburgh, they're all transport workers. And that's really why we're a bit of a different union, I think.
Definitely.
But we could then, it inspired other people. And there were loads of young people, loads of teachers and nurses, even barristers were out on strike. The only people out on strike with us when we started were the barristers in London, remarkable, out in their wigs at the High Court and all that. But loads of people who thought they weren't working class found out that they were. Junior doctors, even the consultants. I addressed the BMA consultants mass meeting. There's about 1,000 people, professors of chemotherapy and radiology, hitting the cobbles saying we're going out on strike, not just for our money, but for the service we work in. If we don't get a decent day's pay, we're all going to have to leave. And we're losing people to Australia and Canada. So it's been a really important period. And I think there's signs of hope, but we've got to keep Labour under pressure.
See, I think the other problem, Mick, and I know it's a hot potato for you guys because I was good pals with Bob Crow, wasn't he Mick's predecessor? Because Mick was your predecessor, Mick Cash, who was a nice guy as well. I was very friendly with Bob. I loved Bob to bits. Bob was hard as nails. He used to always joke about he's a Millwall supporter, which made him very, very appropriate for trade union leader because everybody hated Millwall. But I think the problem is when we come to Scotland, Mick, the truth is we've no voted Tory. This is 1955.
Yeah.
So we're looking at a different political terrain and perspective with some of the arguments that are going on in England, only exactly the same arguments that are going on.
But that's true of London and Liverpool and Manchester. See, there's these pockets of the country. London hasn't voted Tory since the early 80s. And London has now got, I think it's 75% of all MPs in London are Labour. They're not all our type of Labour, but the country is changing, and there is a bit of a difference between the metropolitan areas, which I include Glasgow and Edinburgh in, and some of the towns and villages that have been left behind by deindustrialisation, where we're getting that turn to the right or turn to populism, probably more accurately. And that's what we've got to do as a movement, and it's some of the stuff I'll be touching on tonight. We've got to get back as a workers' movement, trade unions and political activists, into the places where we were before organically, because that's where the work was. So Pit Village is a good example. But industrial areas, which aren't always in big cities, sometimes are, that's where the right can get in and start blaming the other, blaming the Muslims, blaming migrants and all the rest of it. And it's the trade unions and the more regulated world of work that we used to have up to the 80s that stopped some of that reactionary politics developing. But it is developing now. And at the weekend, this weekend, we'll be out against Tommy Robinson. That's why I'm going back down tomorrow, because Robinson's out on the streets. An Irish heritage person, unfortunately, from our background, leading this right-wing nonsense, making a fortune out of it, by the way, for personal gain, and that's got to be said. So, it's constantly at you. You come out of a bit where we've had a bit of a win on the industrial front, but then this rioting, these racist mobs, which is what I call them, I don't dress it up. This was pure racism that we've seen in the last couple of months. That has got to be addressed by us as a workers' movement. The football lads and lasses getting out there and saying, we're not going with that. We don't want any of that charting at our grounds in England, Wales and Scotland and Ireland, because it's happening back in Ireland now as well. And I was on an anti-racist march in Belfast when I was there a couple of weeks ago. People coming up from Dublin, joining with the UVF and the UDA and BNP supporters, screaming at Irish Republicans and other people, Green Party people and good unionist people, about migration. So we've got to get a bit of class unity and class politics back into everything we do. And that means in the pub, at work, at the football, you drop it in that we're not having any of that stuff. I know that's not as big at Celtic because you've got that culture, but be sure there's a few Celtic fans that might fall that way as well, I would imagine.
The thing that worries me about a scenario where there's a fear within society is that people tap into it, Mick, and then they start to make communities of people believe that the issue isn't the government, as you say.
But we've had it in
immigration.
nearly every decade. So in the 30s, one of my predecessors took on Mosley. We've heard about Cable Street, and I'm sure, but the NUR, my union, National Union of Railmen, took on Mosley in court. Our General Secretary wrote a pamphlet condemning fascism, condemning the blue shirts, supporting the Spanish Civil War, and he got taken to court by Mosley, and the trade union had to gather round, high court fees, and Mosley got awarded a farthing, one of these judgments, the famous judgment. And we turned our people round because there was a lot of people blaming the Jews, admiring Hitler and all that nonsense. We had to do it in the 50s when Mosley came back in my area in London, in West London, after the riots in Notting Hill. Had to oppose him in the 70s with the National Front, and some of you, Tommy, I'm sure you remember that. All the marches we did, Rock Against Racism. So we've got to get the cultural side out of our people. We've got to get the union side, we've got to get the political side, and the active people on the council estates and all that, opposing racists. Because I'm convinced there's an anti-racist, anti-intolerance majority, a progressive majority in this country, but they're often passive. And we've got to provoke them to coming out on a broad front. Absolutely. But it's all our role. Everybody's got to do it.
Yeah, we need spokespeople. We need people who others see, who are platformed. And that's what I mean about you giving us so much encouragement in this last couple of years, because up until then, you were getting assholes coming on supposedly represent the other side, but they were just as bad as the other side. Now you're coming on and you're speaking like us. Yeah. You've got the same lived experience as us, and you're able to reach working class communities more than these people with the marbles in their mouth will ever be able to reach.
But we've done it all before, and we could do it again. I remember in the 70s, before punk, right? And Tommy missed all that, I think. He was listening to Kaylee music or whatever. But
Carly Simon, I love Carly.
All the rock stars were saying, I'm a tax exile, is all terrible, against the Labour government, against Healey's chancellorship. And all you got in the music press was, it's terrible, I'm being taxed, I'm Mick Jagger, I've had to move to the south of France with all these beautiful people. Then punk came along, and they said, we're against racism, the Clash.
Yeah.
And we had the Rock Against Racism rallies. We've got to get our pop stars and our rock stars involved in the Labour movement. The workers' movement's got to be bigger than just unions and workplace. It's got to be cultural, the co-op side. We've got to get our footballers standing up, but we've got to make them feel comfortable by not overloading them with all the politics. If they want to say, I'm anti-racist, and I do admire taking the knee, by the way, and that should be supported. It was a big thing for them to do because they're agents, of course, are saying avoid all that. Don't say anything, just stay out of it. So we've got to make the workers' movement a welcoming place for everybody of all sorts of backgrounds.
Well, I think there's an inherent distrust of politicians, right?
Yeah.
So back in the day, Palestine, how do I know about Palestine? The first person I heard speaking about it, Mick, was Bobby Gillespie, the lead singer of Primal Scream. So it shows you how a musician or a footballer, someone who maybe a youth or a community of people look up to, can inspire and influence the way that they actually look at the situation. Because if you're relying on the propaganda that you see on the mainstream media, Mick, then you're going to be one of these people that end up in fear. Tommy was talking about when you started appearing on TV screens, when I became aware of who you were. And at that point, I just think there was so many people, right, who wanted a leader, Tommy. We're talking about a Tory government who were just basically grinding us into the dirt. The cost of living crisis, we had COVID, we had the worry and the concern around Brexit. And then all of a sudden, here's somebody, and I thought you were an authentic voice.
Yeah.
Can I ask you the question, though? Was there a moment where you realised that and then started to worry and have fear and anxiety yourself?
Well, I would have done if the reception hadn't been good. I mean, I genuinely can say I've had maybe half a dozen people make a negative comment. But, I mean, on the train up today, punters, passengers, and thanks for what you've done. Don't always agree with you, but thanks for doing it. A lot of people say to me that they've been inspired to become trade unionists, which is really delightful. They actually joined a union or got active in their union. Some people say, I went on strike because of what the RMT was doing.
Yeah.
But let's not forget, in my union, there are hundreds, if not thousands of people who could do my job. And there are other trade union activists that could do it as well. But the mainstream media locks us out. And one of the advantages of podcasts and the online stuff, there's a lot of nasty stuff out there. I'm not unaware of that. But there are some good people like Politics Joe and Double Down News and other people that are really progressive that like to do extended pieces. And people are getting back to the idea that you can hear a longer argument rather than the soundbite.
Yeah.
And that's a really good development. People are actually sitting there on the train or at home, and rather than watching celebrity rubbish, they're actually listening to fairly complex, developed arguments. But what you've got to do is get the message out there quick. And try to do live things with the media because they cut up everything else you do.
Absolutely. You've used that brilliantly. One of the things you talked about there, Mick, is so important. I like to call it absolutism. And it's this tendency that far too many people have got is somebody will say something that's very progressive and very helpful, but they don't support somebody else. So, I'm not supporting them.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
I think we've got to get away from this idea that, if you don't sign up to everything that I support, then I'm not supporting.
Well, absolutely. I mean, one of the most, from my background, I'm an ex-Catholic, I'm an atheist now, but from my background, abortion has always been a big thing. And you can get some of the most lovely, progressive people who are Roman Catholics who can't go with us on abortion. You've got to respect that. Yep. I said to somebody one day who was hectoring me about this, it's disgusting. I said, what do you want me to do? Not talk to any of my aunties? I've got dozens of them, by the way. I'm never going to talk to anyone in my family ever again, even though they're Labour voters, trade unionists. You've got to accommodate people, and Britain is more diverse. When we were out campaigning, this is enough, we were trying to provoke the idea of class politics. Who put us up? The churches, the temples, good warriors, mosques were holding meetings because they could hold 1,000 people. Yep. And I thought this is brilliant. We're actually going into temples, bringing people from the white community into a mosque, never been in one before, and hearing trade unionists and others, Dave Ward from the CWU and me speaking about political issues, and then the imam would come out and say, I'm not getting involved, but you're all very welcome to be here. And I thought this was a breakthrough. The same happened in the Anglican Cathedral in Liverpool. Loads of people from every community coming out, and that's what a workers' movement has got to be. If we'd gone back to 1919, Red Clydeside, if you went around asking people individually what they believed or where they worshipped, you'll never get people together. You can't do that. You've got to leave some of that at the door, as we've got to do when we're at work. Definitely. You can't bring all of your beliefs into work. It's called political correctness. Yeah. I think political correctness is a good thing sometimes.
Yep. What I think you are touching on here is when you've got a united front, it doesn't mean that every one of you think the same in every particular issue. But when it comes to racism, fascism,
Exactly.
we have to march with liberals. We have to march with people who we might not agree with on other issues. Here's a wee example. Gary Lineker sometimes puts out stuff, and he's put out stuff recently saying it's about time FIFA bans Israel from...
It's brave. Right. I think it's brave.
Absolutely brilliant.
Got to be backed up.
He's also been very good on attacking Tory politicians for their wolf whistling on migration and their sneaky racism. But instead of saying, brilliant, well done, that guy doesn't need to do that, he could probably just lead a life without any of the hassle, he's doing it. Support what he's doing and build on it. Don't say, it's easy for him to say, he's a millionaire, he gets paid this, blah, blah, blah. Get away from that and get on to the actual issues.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, the issue is important. You mentioned Celtic, and I was smiling there because you're absolutely right about us now. I can remember taking a very good Irish socialist, John Thorne from Dublin. He'd never been in a Celtic Rangers match. I was involved with a militant in the Labour Party as a young, I must have been about 21, 22 or something. And John had asked me, can I get tickets? I got tickets. Celtic Rangers game, New Year's Day. Now, it was either 81 or 80. I sometimes get mixed up. But Mark Walters made his debut.
Yeah.
He's 88.
Yeah.
He's 70 as long as that. Way back there, I thought it was earlier. And you know what, Mick? I'm all proud because I've taken John to the game and I've got him up the Celtic end. And I'm really, really proud. Bloody jungle, the old jungle. We're throwing bananas.
Boy, we can develop that when you ask me what football team was.
Throwing bananas. And the monkey chants.
I know, it's disgusting. And I was at football. I was at football all during that period. My first game of football was in 1968 with my dad, and I've been going ever since. Thousands of games. I can't remember how many football matches I watched. And I will watch any game of football. I used to walk through the park with my wife, and she'd go, "Well, you've gone 100 yards behind me because I'm watching a lot of fat blokes in the park and I'm getting involved in it." But I'll watch any game of football. But there's a load of baggage with it, and you can either ignore all the rubbish that surrounds you, the misogyny as well, let's not forget, and the sexism and the homophobia. I mean, that was the standard chant against a good player.
Yep.
Remember Graham Lasso?
Yep.
Getting all that stuff.
Yep.
And you either stand up to it. It's no good standing up to it on your own, but I think some of the fanzines that came out, if you remember, again, inspired by punk in the early 80s, that challenged some of that. And we had a magazine, When Saturday Comes.
Yes.
For sort of nerdy, lefty football fans like
Still out there.
like me and you, probably.
Yeah, yep.
And that actually emboldened people to come and say, well, form different kind of supporters clubs. And it's probably where the Green Brigade and all that got their inspiration from. But there's a lot of reactionary people support Irish football and Irish
I'm so
Celtic.
proud of that, Mick, because you have mentioned our support base is now not just pro-Palestine, anti-genocide from Israel, but we are now solid on welcoming refugees.
Yeah.
We recognise that we were built by immigrants, and any time now, Paul John, that we see any racism from any of our support base, we make the point, we've got songs that say, if you know your history.
Yeah.
Well, you obviously don't know your history because we were built by immigrants, and therefore we need to continue that hand of friendship for immigrants, not any fist of anger. And I'm so proud that we've changed. But at that time, Mick, I was ashamed.
See, the big thing, I think you make a good point about fanzines because, you know, we did nick the idea, the photocopied fanzine, not the View, was a big Celtic one. Yeah. So it was like an alternative to the Pravda, as the Celtic View is called. But you're right, Tommy, because fast forward now, if that was to happen at Celtic Park, they would be called out. It wouldn't be tolerated because I think there's more of a sense of communication and amongst the fan base. And it started with the fanzines. It's now on things like this type of show, social media. It just wouldn't be tolerated, Tommy, at Celtic Park.
But that does bring us, Mick, because none of us know. Football team. I don't know what.
Let's start with Ireland. Let's start with Ireland. Because I was blown away. I said to you, I fell in love with Jack Charlton's Ireland team, 1988. It was the first, I was kind of watching Mexico 86, but I wasn't that interested at the time, I've got to admit. 88, there was no Scotland, so I supported Ireland. Yeah. And I loved that team. But you were there.
Well, my main team is the Republic of Ireland. I'm a member of the Supporters Club in London, which is in its 40th year this year. We're celebrating that. And we're playing England at Wembley in a couple of weeks' time. We're going to get pumped, don't you think? I'll be there.
New skills will keep them out.
Yeah, I'll be there. Well, you're going to need 4 of them, I think. We're pretty low. But that's my main team. So I was there in Stuttgart 88, and Ray Houghton, late of this parish, is one of my heroes. And I actually love what they used to call the Anglo-Irish or the Scottish-Irish. I like players that have come from Britain and play for Ireland. Because when I started going, half the support was London Irish and Scottish, people from Glasgow coming down, Celtic supporters, I suppose. And it was great. It was all unofficial. You hired your own bus. So that's what I like. When I had the kids and all that, I couldn't go as much. I didn't have enough money. And it all did really well. But Stuttgart 88 was my great thing. I couldn't go to Italia 90. That would have been good in Italy. But, we've had some great times. And I've had some great times watching them in the pub, great times watching them on the road. And I've been able to get back in the last few years with my son, who's the grandson of Irish people. But he's obsessed. And we'll be going to watch the Irish rugby team, the Irish ladies football, women's football team, Tiddlywinks, anything Irish, we'll watch it. So that's our passion. Because my mother was from Crossmaglen in South Armagh, and my father was from Cork City. And that's the way we were brought up. And where we were brought up in London, you probably know about Kilburn, Paddington, it was just, I thought everybody was Irish. We used to call people English, and with my accent. I mean, one of my mum's cousins married a fella, and I remember him saying, "Oh, she married that fella, Freddie. He's a very nice bloke, an Englishman. He's a really nice fella." Because my mum was one of 11, and my dad was one of 6, and the relatives, when they came over, it was the war. They couldn't go to America or Australia, so everybody came in the Second World War to Britain. So that community in Kilburn was a big Irish community, and the shocking thing is that a lot of people in Kilburn and Paddington supported Chelsea, including the Irish people, including my dad. He used to go along to Chelsea with a load of Cork blokes, and that's the team we were brought up supported.
I didn't know that.
But I can tell you, there's two things why this will shock Celtic fans. Firstly, the Blues Brothers connection, which I despise. But I remember when it happened. It was the Hillsborough fire, not the Hillsborough, the Bradford fire, right, in the 80s. Terrible occasion. Chelsea put on a charity match to raise money, and the team they invited to play was Rangers, which is a good move commercially because they always turn up. 10,000 of them. And all these idiots that were in our lot, because we've had that Combat 88 and all these BMP people that a lot of people had, thought, these are our inspiration. And they formed this connection with Linfield and Rangers, which has been a terrible thing. It's dying out now because of the commercialisation of football.
Yeah.
And to be fair to Abramovich, who doesn't get much praise, he actually clamped down on a lot of that, all that racism, the new club when Bates left. But what also happened, and football fans will despise this as well, that I've changed my club. Oh, this is really bad, isn't it? So when the kids were little, we used to go to our local club, which a lot of people round here do. You might go off to watch Clyde or whatever, if you're not supporting the main team. I used to go and watch Brentford, and they were down in the dumps with my little boy, and he's now a big Brentford fan. So I'd go and watch Brentford for the last 12 years, I think, from League One, which used to be the third division, and now they're in the Premier League. Very progressive club, by the way. Really good attitude.
I don't have a problem with Brentford.
The Liverpool with Chelsea.
A problem.
But I watch Celtic results. I wouldn't say I'm a big Celtic fan. I watch Hibs results.
Yes.
Anyone that plays in green.
Yep.
Panathinaikos.
Yeah.
Cork City. A bit of Dundalk. It's the nearest club to my mother's. They're going out of business now. And of course Ireland. But anything. I love football. I go to Hanwell Town, which is like you call it a junior side up here, a non-league team, which I can walk to.
I can't let this story go by without mentioning 2013.
Yeah.
Because our pre-season game was against Brentford.
Yeah.
And
I had a great time. I couldn't get a ticket.
Well, I was in London to speak at a big anti-bedroom tax rally.
Yeah.
And while I was there, somebody for the Southwest or Southeast TUC said, "Tommy, is there any chance you could stay on and speak at our TUC meeting next week?" So somebody gave us a flat in London to come down, and I phoned Gail, says, "Listen, bring the rain down, we'll spend a week here." And fortunately, Martin Riley's my pal, who's Lenny's agent. Celtic were playing. I go on the phone to him, any chance he gets a couple of tickets. Bang, got his tickets for the game. And I'll tell you what, it was a beautiful, beautiful experience because the wee part, I don't know if he's in the same ground now.
They've just moved a couple of seasons ago. That was falling apart, our ground.
Because it was a cracking wee ground.
That's a beauty, our ground.
That's right.
Floodlights.
Oh,
and pubs all around. Brentford, to its credit, is a brewing town. It's full of, and the ground, Griffin Park, is a beer Griffin ale, and there's a pub called Griffin Brewery. There were pubs everywhere.
Well, Jesus, the flat that I was in was walking distance from Griffin. And if you just walk, and it's just pubs everywhere. But what I loved, Paul John, was I'd met a lot of the Celtic fans. They were absolutely brilliant that day. And fortunately, you can go either way sometimes, but fortunately, I got a bit of Celtic fans seeing us, and they all started chanting, "If you hate the fucking sun, clap your hands." and it was absolutely...
Well, outside Brentford's old ground at the Royal Horse Guardsman is the Brentford Celtic Supporters Club.
Wow.
A chapter there. And at that game would have been our own RMT chapter, CSC, Underground Celtic Supporters Club, started by RMT reps and branch activists, Tomo, Jim McDade from Clydebank. Brian Munro's passed away from up this way. And in the Cock Tavern, if you're ever down, any of your Celtic fans near Euston Station, it's the most vibrant Celtic supporters club in London, right off the station at Barrowwick.
I have heard.
King's Cross or Euston.
See, when you're talking about...
We can't let this go by, Mutt, with making the point we did beat you that day. But here's...
Yeah, but I think Brentford were in Division 3 and you were in the European Cup.
Well, I think these were just actually, if not going up, maybe it was the following season, But the more remarkable thing was Amido Baldi scored.
You did, I remember him.
It wasn't very successful, but
But what's happening with Scottish football, though? This is the problem. It's now become the undercard for the Premier League.
Absolutely.
So on Sunday, you get 2 Premier League games, which might be Leicester against Ipswich, and Celtic and Rangers will be the undercard to that game at 12 o'clock. This makes me despair.
For me,
Because when I was a kid, and my old man used to look out for it, it was one of the big events. And watching Scottish football was as big as watching the English Division 1. Something's got to happen.
when you consider the Irish diaspora all over the world, the Irish bars, the Celtic bars on match day that are tuning in to watch Celtic, Mick, I think we're held back by the authorities within the game. So Celtic have hit the ceiling a long time ago, and there's nowhere else for us to go.
Something's got to be done about, in America, for all American sports problems, they will not allow a team to dominate. Kansas City Chiefs are dominating now. But they have the draft and all that, and they finance the other clubs. And the GAA do this. Mm-hmm. They get really worried if Dublin keeps winning the All-Ireland football, and they finance other counties. The poorest counties get the most money. They put gyms in. You cannot have a competitive Scottish football unless you've got a team in Dundee, good team in Aberdeen and elsewhere, and other teams in Glasgow. It's just not functioning, is it? It's like the Harlem Globetrotters. You're playing the Washington Cardinals every week. I mean, I watched the game at Inverness. 9/10 of the ground was Celtic.
Yeah.
Now, that's great if you're travelling, but it's not going to do the game any good if these clubs are saying, just come for a day out on the buses, get on the ale, and watch us get pumped 4-0 by your team. It's just, what's going to happen? When you go to Europe, you get...
Exactly, because the challenge isn't at home. The redistribution of the broadcast deal has to be fairer.
Yeah, but the broadcast deal is not very big, is it?
And even
that's
that
the problem.
Has to be better. Yeah. So you need to give more sponsorship and more of the broadcast deal to the smaller clubs to assist them. Because financially, we've got a team in Inverness, Cally Thistle, who were in the Scottish Cup final 2 seasons ago. They're currently in administration.
Yeah.
And, you know, and there's a lot of clubs teetering on
But
the
they couldn't
edge.
sell their allocation, could they?
No, teetering
But if you
on
can't
the
get
edge.
Hibs and Hearts up somehow, they've got to come up.
Where's the capital clubs?
Yeah.
I think they've got to take responsibility a wee
Oh, absolutely,
as
yeah.
well, you know.
Yeah.
You mentioned Hibs before, and I'm not surprised. We know, obviously, the formation of Celtic was inspired by what was happening in Edinburgh, but it leads us on to James Connolly as well.
Yep.
And obviously born in Edinburgh and became a hero of yours and many others all around the world. Tell us about how inspirational James Connolly has been to you.
Well, it goes back, I mean, we're steeped in Irish history, but I always look for the person who's coming in at an angle. Mm-hmm. So Connolly and Larkin in particular came in as people that were not in the mainstream of Irish nationalism and Irish republicanism, and were a stone in the shoe for many people in the nationalist movement. So it really interested me, but so did people like Robert Tressel, who wrote The Ragged Trouser Philanthropist from Dublin. I like all those characters who are not in the mainstream. And Connolly's efforts, I mean, I was in Belfast a few weeks ago at the Connolly House, and you should go and see that, those of you that are interested in it, on the Falls Road. He went to Belfast to try and organise textile workers, to try and bring Protestant and Catholics together across the divide. And you've got to admire somebody like that who's so pushing against the mainstream and, you know, the work of Sisyphus, or whatever you want to put it. You've got to admire them. But when you say, you know, he's born in Edinburgh, he was born into such poverty, destitution, really. And these people pushed our movement, the trade union movement, the Irish Republican movement, of course, and socialism itself, the very idea. And then what people forget, I mean, he went off to the States for, I think, 8 or 9 years and tried to organise those workers there. So I do a lot of these things. I do the Mother Jones Festival in Cork. Mary Harris, who was an Irish trade unionist who went out fighting the miners' strikes with guns against the Pinkertons and all that. There's tons for us to read. And what I think we're being forced out of is our own heritage. So as Irish trade unionists and Irish heritage trade unionists, we've got to learn this stuff. But we've also got to look at other people's heritage, because I'm sure there's people from a Protestant background who've got these heroes as well. And we've got to reach out and say, where do we come together? Where are the connections between us that makes us a class, not just an interest group? And Connolly tried to do that, and so did Larkin. So that's what inspires me, and it helps that he's was a Hibs fan, or so they say. I'm not sure. I'm not convinced that much of a Hibs fan he was.
We've got a wee collection.
Somebody said he was a ball boy, but I'm not. I don't know, a pinch of salt.
We've got a wee collection of books here. Normally, you're an unusual guest in some respects, Mick, because normally it's footballers or well-known Celtic supporters. You're here because we love you bits and we love the fact that you stand up for the working class. But here's some of our heroes, because Bob Holman, London boy, I don't know if you ever met Bob, a beautiful man. He wrote that Keir Hardie book.
Yeah.
John McLean, when I was in jail first time in '92, a big pal, big blue nose actually, big Bob Wiley from BBC fame, sent me that book, In the Rapids of Revolution. John McLean, a fantastic book. Obviously, your big man, or the big fella, as he was known, for your West area.
West Cork, yeah.
Cork, unfortunately, a tragic story in terms of the fact that he was assassinated by the very same people that he fought alongside for Ireland's freedom, but an inspiring story. But here's something, Paul John, that I wanted to bring to your attention. In terms of our understanding of our history, James Connolly, Scotsman, John McLean, Scotsman, Keir Hardie, Scotsman. We've got an absolutely fundamental working class history that is rich, it's such a fabric, such a tavern. But, and I don't mean to have a go at Tim Pat Coogan, because Tim Pat Coogan is a fantastic Irish historian and he's written some fantastic books and histories. But here's a wee bit from a great book, 1916, The Easter Rising, fantastic story of the Rising, really humanises some great documents that they've got hold of. But here's a wee section, just as an example, from page 40 of the book. It talks about Jimmy Larkin, as you've just talked about, and the fact that James Larkin and James Connolly got together in terms of the Dublin lockout. The lockout ended in defeat for the workers. This is 1913. And Larkin departed for America. But his colleague, James Connolly, who with Larkin had founded the Irish Transport General Workers Union, remained in Dublin with his tiny citizens' army operating from the union's headquarters, Liberty Hall. Connolly was born in County Monaghan in 1870.
That's where his parents came from.
Exactly. But the point I'm making, Mick, that sometimes I'm critical of our own class for no doing a bit of reading, no doing a bit of research, no knowing their history. But here's a man who should know his history, and he gets the place of birth wrong for James Connolly, I would say.
Yeah, and I think these histories are really important. And I think the connection between Scotland and Ireland, England and Ireland are really important, because many of the characters had spent time in England, had spent time working here and in Scotland. Clark, I think, Thomas Clark, who was probably the leader of the Irish Republican Brotherhood, was born on the Isle of Wight. Many of the people had served in the army. Connolly's served in the army. And so when we condemn people, people go, oh, he's a soldier, he's a this, that, and the other. Connolly spent 9 years in the British Army before he became politically aware. And what Marx tells us is you're made by your surroundings. Your thought patterns are created by the culture and what's surrounding you. And people change. And that's what we've got to always remember. Football's changed. Football supporters change. They can change for the bad. They can become sucked in by populism and bigotry and sectarianism, or they can become progressives. And that's what we've got to aim to do. And our football culture and our history and heritage and our music and all that is part of it. And I'm, if I can play a part in it, I'm delighted to do it.
Connolly's brother had already joined the army. John Connolly was already in the army, and Connolly at 14 pretends to be 16 to join the army. He served a bit in India, but he served most of it in Ireland. And in actual fact, as you say, Mick, the whole Engels idea of you're shaped by your surroundings is while he's serving in the British Army that he grows this absolute hatred of the landlords of Ireland, which fires him up for his future life as a socialist and a trade union organiser. And it's so important because Paul John and I were having this talk recently about sometimes people say, he's in the army, he's in the police, he's this, he's that. And I keep saying, we tar people with brushes.
Yeah.
There are some decent police, there are some decent people in the army, there are some bastards that are bus drivers, and there are some great bus drivers. We have to try and be a bit more careful and not painting brushes.
There's an interesting guy. There's a bloke called Captain Jack White. I don't know if you've ever heard of him. He was in the Irish Citizens Army. He was a captain in the British Army, so he would have been one of Connolly's superiors. He saw the lockout, joined the Citizens Army, gave them drill, joined the Easter Rising, but he was from a unionist, an Orange family in County Down, I think, and he was trying to hold Republican meetings in his own father's Orange Hall. So people move dynamically.
Absolutely.
Depending on the surroundings.
I think we've got to that stage, going back to something you said.
I'm sorry about paying this, because it is important for listeners, particularly of a different persuasion. Let's remember the Catholic Church condemned the Easter uprising.
Yeah.
So this was a Catholic uprising. This was a workers' uprising.
They've condemned virtually everything that people.
Exactly.
Spanish Civil War.
They probably condemned Lisbon Lions at one stage as well.
Well, going back to my upbringing in a small mining village, a lot of people I knew joined the army, and that was because there was nothing else for them, Mick.
Yeah.
So it's easy now to polarise and say you can't be a Celtic fan if you joined the British Army, but they were in a scenario where there was all the industry was gone, there was nothing else for them.
But they teach you that culture as well. So if you walk around the towns of Britain, you'll find plenty of recruiting offices in Glasgow, Liverpool, Newcastle. You never find them in West London. Londoners don't join the army generally. There's one regiment, I think. London's the biggest city in the country. There's barely a recruitment office. So they know where to go. They know where. You see the adverts for the Navy at the minute. Born in Blythe, Geordie accents being. So you've got to come into the army because it's your culture. Now, I've got nothing wrong with the people in the army. They're working class people. We've got to regard them. We've actually got a strike in the MOD at the minute, the RMT, the Royal Fleet Auxiliary. And there's lots of people in there who you wouldn't think would be in the RMT. But what they want is a fighting union because they're getting ripped off. Nobody's joining the army now because the Tories have ripped that to pieces. Nobody's got any money. The soldiers are all leaving to go and work in supermarkets. So everybody's getting ripped off in this country is the message. And people from that tradition can change.
Yeah, 100%. You know, you were talking there. You've been brought up. I've said this to Tommy a million times. You may not be a Celtic fan. You might not go to the games, Mick. But you've got a Celtic state of mind, right?
Yeah.
So see if you're outside looking in, and here's a football club in Scotland, the only club in the UK who refuses to wear a poppy on their jersey, whose fans will wave Palestinian flags, even though we'll get fined for doing it. We'll wave Lebanon flags as well. From the outside looking in, do you think to yourself, wait a minute, this is a fan base that's awake to the world in which we live? And there's a respect, I think, around the world from the right-minded people that Celtic support, I think, are ahead of the curve a lot of the time when it comes to politics.
They are, but you can't be self-satisfied equally. I mean, it's taken a long time to get there, as Tommy was saying. So we've got to broaden that out a bit, and it depends. I always find it, what's the relationship like with the other team and the other team supporters? Now, there's plenty of people in my union that are Rangers fans who say they don't want anything to do with sectarianism. That's the way they were brought up. That's what their fathers supported. They've got probably some of that politics, but they're very progressive people. And you've had that debate during the referendum. And what I found the most interesting thing about the referendum and the rise of the SNP was the switch of the west of Scotland Celtic support, essentially. That's what made the SNP. It's what brought, from my view, from London, brought the referendum possible, because until that time, until the Celtic fan base switched in some ways, you were never going to get it. So it's interesting to see where the Rangers fan base goes and how we create a progressive element in the Rangers fan base. People, what I find interesting about Celtic fans, and take this as a criticism, everyone regards everybody that supports Rangers as some kind of reactionary, right? Which maybe is okay on match day, but it depends what you think of it in between. And if we can create a workers' movement, how do we get that engagement with people from other clubs? Because you can end up saying, we're better than you because we're progressives. But are people in the Rangers fan base progressive? You don't have to answer that one.
No, it's a good. Listen, Mick, you know what? It's a brilliant point, because I name-checked earlier a guy called Bob Wiley, who Bob was my muse as I was growing up politically, young lad, interested in politics. Bob was a militant organiser. Went over to South Africa, worked with the ANC underground, come back with stories that made us all inspired about the struggle against apartheid. Bob, massive big blue nose. Davy Churchley was another organiser. Nearly became the MP for Glasgow Pollock, where I was raised. Fantastic orator, brilliant organiser, blue nose. You know, so the idea that we have to try and stand against is that every Rangers fans are reactionary, right? Some of them are. There's no doubt in my mind that some of them are, because it's important that we don't refuse to tell the truth as well, right?
Sure, yeah.
However, the idea that they're all the same is just pish, and we have to call it out, you know?
But I did a meeting on the Shankill Road, I was telling you earlier, a few weeks ago, about this Ulster Workers' Council. And when you go in there, there's an awful lot of Union Jacks, there's a lot of stuff that I don't like, UVF flags, all that. Just inside the library door, there's a plaque to Spanish Civil War veterans from the Shankill. And at that time, in the 1930s, there was a Republican movement that was trying to be socialist, and there were people from the Shankill trying to get involved in progressive politics. Of course, the danger with very simple stuff about football culture and pipe bands and all that is it gets buried. All that subtlety, people you're talking about there that have actually given their lives to progressive politics and even revolutionary politics in some ways, gets buried. I mean, I find it really interesting that there are Fenian and Catholic Republican pipe bands that mimic what loyalist flute bands do. I find the music really horrible. And I thought, why do you do that? There's such a heritage of, I don't want everybody to take this as the wrong way, there's such a heritage of Irish traditional music. Why do we have to copy in Republican flute bands exactly what they're doing? Because I think it's this thing that we're just going to go butt up against each other all the time, which is fine on the football pitch. But let's face it, most of the people playing professional football for both teams know nothing about this equation. They might have done 30 years ago, 40 years ago, but now they're professional footballers. And if they got a chance, a Celtic or Rangers player, to sign for Ipswich tomorrow, they're probably going to go. So the investment is all around the ground, but the players on the pitch, they're doing a job.
Yeah. Mark Riley's a great example.
Yep.
He's passing through, he ends up going to Brighton.
Yep.
And it's the fans that are the constant.
My dad used to always say to me, whenever I was greeting Celtic get beat, you know, I was in a bad mood and all the rest of it. And, you know, rest his soul, but he always used to say to me, listen, son, they don't pay your rent. And, you know, the truth is, we're so passionate, but we've got to remember, it's a game.
Yeah.
But over and above the point that Paul John made earlier, Mick, which I do think, and you're right, you're absolutely right to make sure that we're no smug about it, because there's always difficulties, and some of the stuff I've seen in the Republic, I'm ashamed, by the way. A country where immigration is in its DNA, for God's sake, and they're having a go at immigrants.
In a country where the blue shirts were suppressed by the state, by De Valera, and the Republicans chased them off. But yeah, but that again is in areas where the Labour movement isn't big. The Labour Party in Ireland's collapsed. The trade unions are quite passive, even though I've got some friends in that movement. They're not out there doing the stuff. They don't have strikes anymore, very rare. And people have lost their way. A lot of working people have lost their way. And it's very easy to seed this reactionary right-wing stuff into people.
I think when you're down there, Paul John, and you're struggling to pay the rent, and there's queues for health service, and Ireland doesn't even have a proper health service. A lot of my friends via the Republican movement, that's the point they make about a united Ireland. They say, before we get united Ireland, you need to get a health service built, because there's no attraction for a lot of Irish about becoming united until you get a health service. But I think when people are down, the easiest thing in the world is to have somebody else who you think's lesser than you that you can then blame, that you can scapegoat. And that's with the whole racist immigration, you know, the idea that we blame people coming in boats instead of people coming in yachts, when the people in the yachts are the ones that are taking the piss. The people in the boats are just like us. And all they're trying to do is build a life for their wains, for God's sake. And instead of helping them, we're listening to all that crap for the media that wants us to be against them, Mick. And that's why, as I say, mate, I keep repeating it, that's why voices like yours are so important, because you have that knack and you have that ability to communicate with certain people in certain groups that others don't have.
Well, I get taken down a peg or two when I go to branch meetings. Branch meetings, they call me a right winger.
So the thing, mate, what Tommy's talking about, I felt that the line of questioning, the narrative and the agenda that the mainstream had with you was they were blaming the workers for the strikes. And they were trying to make the public believe that the workers were bad for striking.
Yeah.
And that was the agenda, wasn't it?
Well, I think we busted that, though, fairly quickly, because people have been pushed down so far. And these people running the Tory party and the Labour Party as well, by the way, don't understand how hard it is. If you're leaving even university, but leaving school, trying to get a secure job in the way that I understood it. I mean, I left school in 1978. I was offered free apprenticeships in good companies, and I went on to be an electrician. And I've spent my life in union environments being reasonably well paid. I've never had periods of unemployment. People now, you get a 0 hours contract. You don't know whether you're going to get work next week. If you say anything to the governor, you're probably not going to get work next week. It's really, really difficult. Plus, you might have a student debt on top of you if you've gone there, because you can't get many jobs without a university degree anymore. So it's really tough for people. And people started saying, I've had enough of this. Why can't I get a union? People were coming up to the RMT picket line and saying, how do I get involved in a trade union?
Yeah.
And our members went to say, well, what do you do? Where do you work? This is the union for you. And they were saying, can we join the RMT? And nurses and people like that were saying, can I join the RMT and can you come to our workplace? So there is a hunger out there, because people are seeing the state of the planet. They are seeing they're being ripped off. They're seeing things like Palestine and international issues, and they're going, well, what's the answer? How do working people get a movement together that gives them some answers about this? What we've got to do, I think, is be less dogmatic than we've done in the past, Tommy. We've all been there.
Definitely.
You've been in your groups that have been full on, but we've got to open up and say, look, this is going to be a big movement that welcomes the whole working class. How do you organise people that are doing Deliveroo and delivering curries and pizzas every night? It's really tough.
Yep.
And they're often from people from ethnic minorities, newly arrived, don't always trust trade unions because of the backgrounds of some of the organisations where they've come from in their homelands. We've got to get out there and do it. We've got to need a new type of unionism and change the way we've been, because we assume everybody understands collective bargaining, understands contracts of employment. A lot of people are just happy to get a few bob in their hands. Yeah. So we've got to change what we're doing.
You called it dogmatism, and I used that term, absolutism.
Yeah.
I think we've got to try and get a minimalist set of demands that we can all sign up to. And then once you've signed up to that, we build bridges.
Well, we did that. We tried to do that in this thing, Enough is Enough.
Yes.
And we got so involved in the strikes, we couldn't carry on. They're very simple demands about the winter fuel, decent pay, is it no 0 hours, and a couple of others. People really bought into that. But of course, as soon as we did that, we were getting phone calls saying, you should be forming a committee. There should be rules. We want a constitution. We want you to invite the Socialist Workers' Party. We want a massive committee. And I was going, that is the last thing we need, me and Dave Ward. We want it to be loose. We want it to be a go round. And we want to just tell people, this is how you organise. Get into your union. Get into your tenants association, whatever it is. Keep your creche or your lunch club for the pensioners going. That's where the campaigns are. And later on, you can join them up and we get involved in a movement. But the unions have got to be there, Tommy. This is the thing. The unions have got to come out of work, get into schools, get into the council estates and the schemes and say, this is how you organise. You can be associated with the union even if you haven't got a job. So the STUC and the trades councils and all that have got to come out of the committee rooms and start doing it in front of working people and showing them how they get going.
See, I agree with everything you're saying, but it would be dishonest of me in a podcast like this not to put the other point, Mick. And the other point is that while the trade union movement continues to fund a party that gives you, we're just in after 14 years of the Tories, I know what we'll do. Let's take the winter fuel of half pensioners.
Yeah.
The trade union movement is letting working class people.
Yeah, but it's a struggle. It's a class struggle, and the class struggle happens inside the Labour Party. I'm not a member of the Labour Party.
I know.
There are 48 unions in the TUC, only 11 are affiliated, by the way. So the majority of trade unions are not affiliated, and that's because they're not political. We're one of the few political unions that's not affiliated. Now, Labour Party has done far worse things than the winter fuel allowance. Palestine, Attlee nationalised the railways, nationalised coal, nationalised this, nationalised that, built millions of council homes. He also walked out of Palestine and allowed the creation of the sectarian state. He walked out of India because he said, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm going to end imperialism. Attlee is lauded, but he had a dark side. He was on the right of the party. He reigned in Bevan. It's always a struggle, and that struggle is going to happen somewhere. It happens sometimes at work between the people that want to go on strike or want to run a campaign. It happens in Labour Party constituencies, but you have to build things. We can only defend the welfare state because somebody built it. Mm-hmm. It wasn't built, and don't take this the wrong way, Tommy, by tiny sectarian groups.
No, of course it was.
It was built by people from the centre.
Yeah.
It was built by some people who are religious, people who built the co-op, people who built council housing in our local council chambers, who did that work without much thanks, often. Being criticised by both the left and the right, who just said, I don't care what you're doing, I've got a few billion quid, I'm going to build this massive council estate and knock down these slums. So I'm from the pragmatic view. The reason people think I'm really left-wing is because they stopped hearing where real old Labour, it used to be called, remember back a few years ago.
That's when
they stopped hearing about old Labour, municipal socialism, which was a big thing.
Context is everything, mate, because you've mentioned the achievements of a Labour government post-45 when we were broke.
Yeah, exactly.
You keep hearing, that's Rachel Reeves and all the rest of it. Oh, we're black holes here, black holes there. The country was broke after the Second World War, but they still managed to nationalise the railways.
People forget about Wilson. Right? Wilson is much maligned. Wilson brought in the Sex Discrimination Act, the Health and Safety at Work Act, the Race Relations Act, all in about 2 years. Michael Foot, who's very rarely mentioned, brought in 4 major pieces of legislation in the first 2 sessions. This government, the Starmer's government, is not going to give us any of the employment rights until 2027. Michael Foot was seriously ill when he did that. He did it all on a typewriter or handwritten. These politicians consult and dilute everything down to the consensus which they share with the centre of the Tory party because they're professional politicians.
Absolutely.
That's their career, politics. Mm-hmm. Their career isn't socialism or trade unionism or building council houses.
A career for
like Keir Hardie was not a professional politician. He was a man from pit villages who'd seen poverty. Attlee, to be fair to him, lived in the East End of London, having come out of public school and worked with people who couldn't feed themselves, who didn't have boots on their feet. That's what made him create the welfare state, because he lived there as a youth worker, living in a youth centre, feeding young kids every day.
Entry level into politics, isn't it?
Absolutely. He lived a life and then he became a politician. Mm-hmm. Then he fought in the war. Yeah. He fought leading men out of trenches, which is, he might regret that. He had a battalion named after him in the Spanish Civil War. It wasn't for nothing. The British battalion in Spain was named after Clement Attlee.
Which was a incredible honour.
But he was a complete person. He wasn't a PR exercise. There's loads of drawbacks that you and I would criticise him for, but you couldn't blame him for being what he was. He said, I'm from the centre and I'm going to deliver the welfare state and nobody's going to stop me, which is incredible.
Absolutely.
And then he was exhausted.
No, absolutely.
A couple of wee things here. My dad won't forgive me if I don't mention him and his comrades' strike in 84, 85. Yeah. And before I do that, interesting enough, the only reason I know about Enough Is Enough is because you've got Bobby Gillespie and Kevin Rowland to sing a song. Yeah. It's a power of music. The first time I heard about James Connolly was through song when I was a wee kid growing up. So it's the power of music. The miners' strike 84, 85 left an indelible print in my life. My old fella, obviously, like a lot of his comrades, didn't get paid for a year. They stopped the coal, we had to chop down wood to keep the houses warm, hand-me-downs, all that kind of stuff, free school dinners. And then, when we moved back into the pits and started working again, they started shutting down. We moved from place to place. Yep. So it had a huge effect on me and many others, Mick. But I often look back, and eventually he worked on a Channel Tunnel. Just mining in a different direction, of course.
And I get out.
Yeah, exactly.
He was going across the channel the other way.
Yep. There's a great picture of him in an orange boiler suit, just as at that moment where they do the breakthrough. But I look back on it with a tinge of regret, not at the actions of my dad and all the striking miners, but at the result and what it meant, because it felt like a defeat.
Well, it was a massive defeat for us. And, people now say, well, the planet and all that is important, but we didn't have that in mind at that time. My view was we didn't do enough. I didn't do enough as a young man. I was a 21-year-old. I went to a few rallies, collected a few bob, went to all the social events, supported. But we didn't do enough as a trade union movement. I was in the electricians union, which had a terrible record in the miners' strike. But the TUC and the Labour Party let them down. And what we didn't analyse, that this was a deliberate trap. Deindustrialisation, of which the coal mines had. Remember, steel happened first, but the printing strikes already happened in 81. Steel was 82, 83. I might have my years wrong. But the run up to this was a deliberate act by Thatcher and Sir Keith Joseph and
Nicholas Ridley.
Nicholas Ridley, a horrible man, backed up by Milton Friedman and this whole monetarist thing. It was a plot to deindustrialise us, to break the power of the unions, but to break working class culture and solidarity and everything we had. And people forget that much of working class culture was in villages. The mines were in villages, not in big cities. And now when we look back on it, I think we're still living in Thatcherism. This attitude of every person for themselves, dog eat dog. Remember the 80s, loads of money and all that stuff. That was the way that our workers' minds and people's minds were changed from solidarity, with all its downfalls. And there were a lot of problems in working class communities with racism and homophobia and all sorts of stuff, and a slightly closed mind. But it shattered us. I mean, we're still trying to recover of what is our culture. What do we believe in as working people? What binds us together? The miners knew what it was, but we fell short of an analysis, and the TUC and the Labour Party fell short of that, and they didn't offer an alternative. Now, some of the European countries did. We used to malign some of these northern social democratic states, but they retooled what's now called just transition. If you've got a closing industry, how do you take the workers with you? And we're getting it now in Scotland and in the northeast about the closure of the energy industry. There's no plan in place for taking all these riggers and welders and whatever and putting them into new industries, because all the wind turbines have been built in Denmark, Germany, Sweden, advanced economies, where they did do it. We've got no plan in Britain or Scotland or England, and we'll be left behind yet again. So there is a bigger picture, but what we've got to do as workers is get our own bigger picture, our own agenda about how we're going to reshape the economy. And we failed to do that. And we certainly failed the miners in the early 80s by not having that plan about how we transition.
Yeah. And you go back to these villages now, Mick, and they're ghost towns, a lot of them. There's no hope, there's no future.
All over.
Yeah.
And the ones are most ironic in Notts and Derbyshire, which broke first and were given the treat of you'll be all right, they're some of the worst places.
Exactly.
Terrible drugs habits and people alienation.
Yeah.
I'll be saying it tonight. The alienation we've got now is conspiracy theory. And all this stuff you get online, people are completely confused about what they believe and what their own identity is. And they're fed all this nonsense, keyboard warriors and all that.
But you think about it, Mick, because we've mentioned the Ridley report, right? Nicholas Ridley. The detail was incredible. They actually wrote down what they were going to do. So one of the first things they did was to get the haulage workers out of trade unions to privatise haulage.
And
because they realised that in terms of moving coal, they couldn't rely on the real workers because the real workers were still trade unionised. Yeah. So they needed the haulage workers to be privatised, privatise haulage, build up cold stocks, pay the police a big increase in their wages, get the police on site. It was ABC. You talk about conspiracies. When we were talking about these things, people say, rubbish. They don't do that type of thing. Actually wrote it down.
It's the kind of planning Celtic need when they go away to play a German team in Europe.
They did all right against Santa Lanza. They did all right against Salah.
It was all right.
Bag, actually.
It was all right the other night.
You mentioned Brentford. You took one of your best players.
Yeah.
I love one. I was a big fan. I was a big fan. No, everybody was a big fan.
But this is the thing about Scottish football. You've got the biggest team in Scotland. It will go to Brentford.
I know. On Brighton, absolutely.
Yeah. And that's, you know, I love Brentford, but they're hardly Man United. You know?
I love watching him. I think the wee manager, I think he's very
He's good. Yeah, he's
very
good.
refreshing.
It's like Celtic are a gateway to a club like Brentford or Brighton, who are then a gateway to a top six.
Yeah, and that's a sad analogy of where Scottish football is.
See, Mike, we've discussed this. We're on this podcast. All our guests, most of them are ex-footballers, most of them ex-Celtic players, and we've see the point you've made about where is Scottish football going.
Yeah.
That's what we discuss. I mean, for instance, we keep talking about reserve football. Up in Scotland, there used to be reserve football, which gave a platform for new young players and for players that were injured to come back in and play competitively, play with men, so that by the time...
But there's got to be something about the style of Scotland. So if you take Brentford, they've got 6 Danish players, got a Danish coach, Danish backroom. Danish football, Denmark is the same size as Scotland, roughly in population, has not had full-time professional football that long, but they're making a breakthrough. The Danish team is better than the Ireland team, better than the Scottish team. Consistent. I'm not talking about in one tournament. They're never going to win the World Cup, but they've got a chance of qualifying for most tournaments. They've got a chance of getting through to the second stage in many of the tournaments. Sweden can do it. Finland not as good. Norway can do it. How come they can do it? Ireland's got the same problem. The League of Ireland is getting better, but it's at a very low level. Clubs go bankrupt all the time. There's got to be a rationalisation, I hate to say it, as a management consultant, in Scottish football. Can you carry on with 3 or 4 divisions?
No, absolutely not.
Have you got to say, this is going to be the Dundee Bears and the Aberdeen Cougars and the
2 leagues.
the Celtic Rangers?
To be fair to Paul Johann, he got a wee bit of ribbon for this maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago, but he did suggest that Aberdeen could come second this season.
Well, wouldn't it be a bad thing then?
Exactly.
Good for them.
Exactly, because we've you talk about the years of Kenny Dalglish going no to a Brentford, but going to a Liverpool. You talk about the players that we produced in those 70s and 80s. Absolutely.
But when Liverpool signed Dalglish, that was a coup. They were getting him from a team that was equal.
Yeah.
Dalglish probably would sign for Brentford or Brighton now.
Nowadays.
If you had a guy that could score 35, 40 goals in Scottish football, he'd probably only go for 25 million, and he wouldn't be going to Man United.
No, he'd need to go via, a bit like Van Dijk, he'd go to Liverpool via Southampton.
But that side that Aberdeen had under Ferguson was a fantastic football team.
Absolutely. And I mean, we played them just at the weekend, Mick, and we were at the game, and the truth is, it's no a fluke. This guy's now won 15 games, right? He's won 14 of them, and the 15th game against us. That's brilliant. Right?
Yeah.
So let's hope that there's a new challenge, because Scottish football was at its most competitive when there was a strong Aberdeen, strong Dundee United, strong Hibs, strong Hearts, and obviously strong Celtic Rangers. But obviously, when we are super dominant, and since the 21st century, you and I have talked about this, Celtic's been just absolutely dominant. But I think it does have an effect in Scottish football as well.
Football is about tension, right? You cannot have football where you're winning 4-5-0 every week. Some of the best moments in football I've been to have been to a really bad game, really tense, and there's a last-minute winner for your team.
Yeah.
And it's been a rubbish game. These days, 97 minutes of rubbish, somebody whacks one in from the edge of the box on a fluke, and it completely changes your day, changes your weekend.
Who, when you're growing up, who's your idols football-wise?
Well, my Charlie Cook,
Right.
Aberdeen and Dundee, Peter Osgood,
Peter
and Chopper Harris. It's that side, and that was the best side that was the groovy side in English football at that time, and Leeds United were the others, the real hard nuts. And they used to go, if you've ever seen the 1970 FA Cup final, which most of your viewers won't remember, but that was a really good period. There were real characters. Ozzy was the king of Stamford Bridge. That was before all the right-wing nonsense that we got. There were a lot of Scottish fans down at Chelsea, because it was in that area of London. It's quite a groovy area, King's Road and all that. We got all that stuff about the Blues Brothers 15 years later. So most people in West London would have been Chelsea supporters. including the Irish community. A lot of QPR fans as well. But my old man,
balls, I remember.
yeah, and that was a good period. My old man said, "Why would you go and watch QPR? They're semi-professional." But when he came over in the war football, strangely, everyone used to come. It was like superstars.
Yeah.
They were all in the army, and they used to play war football. So you get Stanley Matthews turning out for Chelsea. You get somebody from Scotland playing for Arsenal. They'd put these games on, and they get massive crowds. That's why he went there. But yeah, that was the side. Aussie was the King Stamford Bridge, fed by Charlie Cook.
Brilliant.
And he was a great player. And then, of course, Pat Nevin.
Yeah, we Pat.
One of my heroes.
Yeah.
And that was just before, again, we had a good side then with Kerry Dixon, remember?
Remember Kelly? Yeah.
And Steve Finiston from up here. Ian Britton was one of them. Steve Clark, great player. And then we got all that Blues Brothers stuff. And
Have you ever met Pat Nevin?
I've never met Pat Nevin. I'd like to meet him.
A very good.
You got him here. He's going to come in now.
Well, that's it. This is your life.
We could have tried. I mean,
But Pat had I've read his book. He had his problems about the way Celtic was set up, didn't he? And he says he's now a Hibs fan, but I don't know if that's. So he's done what I've done.
yeah, he's still got.
There's two Celtic fans done that, and to my knowledge, publicly, and it's Sean Connery and Pat Nevin.
Yeah.
And I don't think they'll ever be forgiven. But you would really enjoy his company.
Yeah.
Football, politics, and music.
Yeah.
If the diaries align in the future, Mick, would you go
Yeah.
back to a Celtic game?
I would, yeah. It's an ambition, yeah.
On the bucket list, I'm
Yeah.
pretty sure we can make it happen.
Well,
Listen, the last hour or so has been fascinating. Thank you.
Thank you.
So
I hope it
much
wasn't
for
too
joining
heavy.
us.
But
No, I enjoyed every moment. Thanks for joining us, Mick.
Thank you. Cheers.
thank you, brother.
Cheers, Tory.
Thanks again for joining us on A Celtic State of Mind. What an incredible journey Mick's been on. And join us next Friday for This is A Celtic State of Mind.